This is the McKinsey Podcast, where we help you make sense out of our world's toughest business challenges.
Welcome to the show. I'm Lucia Rahilly.
And I'm Roberta Fasaro. When it comes to generative AI, McKinsey senior partner Alex Singla says it's a great tool, not a terror.
It allows you to actually take away some of the mundane tasks you don't want to do anyway, and open up time to spend more time problem solving, cracking hard problems, spending time with your people, coaching your folks, and really thinking.
Alex joins me and McKinsey partner Michael Chui to talk about how business can make the best use of Gen AI. But first, a quick check-in on the state of U.S. consumers with McKinsey senior partner Kelsey Robinson. This is one in a series of check-ins we'll have about consumer behavior. Kelsey, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
So how has consumer behavior changed since this time last year?
So we're continuing to see what I would call mixed signals from consumers, and it's really driven by an uncertain economy. So with inflationary pressure and a tight labor market, the U.S. consumer is spending differently, and they have some actions that are pretty contradictory. There's three main things we're seeing in our latest research. So first, there has actually been an increase in their confidence versus last summer. So now a third of U.S. citizens are feeling optimistic. Last summer, that was a quarter. And optimistic specifically about the country's economy. And similarly, we see the pessimism is waning. So that's good. The second is consumers are still worried about rising prices and inflation, pretty consistent with last year. And increasingly, they're worried about job security. And lastly, we're seeing that while there is this uncertainty, consumers are still opening their wallets. They're just being creative about it.
So let's talk about that creativity. What are consumers doing to save money?
The U.S. consumer is choosing to save primarily by trading down. So they are foregoing more expensive brands or stores for cheaper ones. Or they might be changing the quantity that they buy to get the cheapest price. So that might mean they're buying less quantity-wise, or in some cases, they might be bulk buying to stock up and get a lower price overall. And what we saw in our latest research was that 80% of consumers are trading down. There is a category difference here too. So we're seeing there's slowing growth in categories like home and pet. And the categories that are more resilient are things like beauty and a lot of categories that are linked to out-of-home experiences, right?
Yes, I'm thinking about my own purchasing, Kelsey, just thinking about how much more I'm spending on travel and getting out of the house, finally. But what about splurging? Is anyone doing that?
40% of U.S. consumers told us they're going to splurge in the coming year on themselves and their families. Travel is a category that they're definitely saying they will splurge on. But they're also saying that they're going to splurge on categories like apparel and footwear.
When you looked at the spending patterns, did you see any generational differences?
Yeah, a lot of the differences we can see in generation. So if we think about a Gen Z versus a boomer, or even a Gen Z versus a Gen X US consumer. So a few examples of that. We just talked about splurging. And what we see is that intent to splurge is much higher for the younger generation. And this is true even if you control for income level too. And so we have 2/3 of Gen Z saying that they intend to splurge and treat themselves. And you compare that to 20% for boomers. The second place we see it is, inflation is obviously very top of mind, but again, job security is really top of mind. And this is much more meaningfully top of mind for the younger generations. We think about the last year, lots of headlines on companies tightening their workforces. And we see 74% of Gen Z is worried about employment. 3/4, it's huge, versus about half of Gen X. And then lastly, the trade down behavior is also correlated with generation. And so again, this dichotomy of while Gen Z tells us they're more likely to splurge, they're also telling us they have to, and that they're more likely to actually trade down and manage costs in other areas.
So Kelsey, what are the key takeaways for companies given these trends?
Yeah, think there's three main implications. One, there's a real need in this moment to be what I call pretty ambidextrous. So both finding the way to deliver value and meet the consumer where they are on the trade down side and communicate how you're delivering value to them, because every consumer is thinking about it. At the same time, again, that spend dichotomy, figuring out in what moments for what products, for what consumer are they willing to splurge? Are they willing, are they willing to treat themselves? And can you be part of actually that joy, right? That actual enjoyment of whether it's at a home or a specific category in retail. Number two, linked to that, the idea of really personalizing how you're speaking to consumers in this moment is critical. You and I probably have very different even purchase behaviors right now. And so how do companies learn as much as they can to make sure they're meeting the consumer where they are? And what we know is that we know over 70% of consumers actually expect companies to personalize things, and they get frustrated when doesn't happen. And in this moment, we've seen it's even more important. Lastly, one learning we haven't touched on yet is there was a big change of omni-channel shopping. That's 6 percentage points higher than last year. Over 80% of consumers are researching and browsing across multiple channels. So, whether they browse on the web or they browse in the store and then convert in one of those channels for a single trip, they're all shopping across channels now. And what's different now is it's also not just the younger generation. It's also Gen X and baby boomers who are doing it too. Really continuing to figure out how do we service and create a seamless experience in an omni way is critical as well.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for a great discussion.
Also critical is figuring out how to make the best use of Gen AI in business. Here are McKinsey partners Michael Chui and Alex Singla to lead the way. Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And Michael, welcome back.
It's great to be back.
So Gen AI has just exploded into the popular imagination over the past 10 months or so, catalyzed, of course, by the launch of ChatGPT last November. And many folks are ricocheting between delight and awe, and probably in some cases fear. So Alex, what did this new research tell us about the business areas that are likeliest to benefit the most from Gen AI?
I think what's important is the notions around like AI and even generative AI have been around a lot longer than when it hit mainstream. Different than what some of the prior automation research had shown is, this actually has real influence on white collar work. And that's a real fundamental differences. So for what we've seen before. So things in the banking industry, in particular, the healthcare industry, have real huge opportunities that one might not have seen before in prior technologies and prior automation, given the kind of the white collar knowledge worker.
What is it about these specific industries that you mentioned? You mentioned a couple, banking and health, that makes them so conducive to benefiting from Gen AI?
So around marketing and sales, for instance, this ability to either create personalized marketing or in some cases even create brand marketing, ask a system to create an advertisement for you, a script, the music, even the video is coming at some point. So, sales and marketing, those industries in some cases have quite a bit of sales and marketing. For example, retail banks do. These technologies are also very good for customer service or customer operations. And, we talk about them being chatbots to the extent to which they can actually answer questions. And again, if you have a lot of customers who are calling and asking you questions, or in fact, you have internal applications, then the potential is really high there. Another area which we spend a lot of time on is the potential of these technologies to improve the ability to write software, because to a certain extent, computer languages are just a language. And if these are, you might have heard the term large language models, you can ask it in English or whatever language to please write me a piece of code that does X, Y, Z. We have a lot of programmers in banks. We have a lot of programmers in retail companies. And so that's a large potential for value as well. And then I think the most under-recognized case is the ability of generative AI technologies to do generative design in research and development. But they can, create a design for you, create an electrical circuit, design a car. I mean, there are a number of those sorts of things. And again, if you map those business functions to different industries, you do find industries like banks have a lot of customer service, have a lot of programmers, and do a lot of marketing. And so you can say, well, that's why they have a lot of potential. But we do see, quite frankly, there's no business and there's no function where these technologies don't have some potential.
And maybe just one comment to just build on what Michael just said. Like on the R&D side, I was literally on a call with a pharmaceutical company just earlier today. And the entire conversation was around, chemicals and the different configurations you put chemicals in to create new drugs and new products that, would take years to experiment with. And can they leverage generative AI to put different chemicals together to accelerate R&D in the pharmaceutical space? It's not like that has been done or proven yet in terms of, making the perfect drug or product that much faster. But that's the thinking of where people want to go.
Do you think it's possible that it will actually expand the frontiers of creativity and innovation in new ways, broaden the scope of what's possible, in other words?
Yes. Writers usually read a lot and artists usually look at a lot of art and, movie makers watch a lot of movies. And so to a certain extent, we even in our own human creativity, use the experience and knowledge that we have. If you can use these systems to accelerate productivity, create more examples. What we know from our, product development research is that oftentimes the problem is, you close down the funnel too quickly. You don't continue to look at multiple alternatives. And what we've discovered, clients doing is saying, look, we can create more alternatives using generative design. And if you can hold open more potential, then maybe you can actually end up with better products at the end of the day, create whole new categories, create new drugs, create systems that are more sustainable, produce less carbon emissions. There are all the kinds of things that we want to do with R&D. And if we can, create a superpower by using these technologies, that can be great not only for companies, but for humankind.
One other thing on the creative side, which I know this isn't exactly the way you're asking the question, but it sparks something to me, which is, yes, generative AI can be creative, but it also, I think, increases the creativity of the user. So let me tell you what I mean by that, is we had, it was 25 chief marketing officers in Europe. We bring together groups of people for roundtables. And we spent a 90-minute exercise walking them through creating their own creative for a product within their business, leveraging generative AI. So you had these 25 chief marketing officers who are literally creating a creative on their product in real time. And you just saw like their eyes open up to say, wow, I knew what this could do, but it was giving them ideas that they might not have had before. Even if the answer wasn't perfect at the end, it was expanding their thinking on what is possible. And so I think, yes, generative AI can be creative, but it can also like accelerate your own individual creativity.
How was the feedback on that?
I will be very honest. I was nervous like crazy. I'm like, this could be, I literally asked, I said, do we have something else to do for 80 minutes if this is a complete dud in 10 minutes? And so I was nervous, but it was a complete home run. Like, because, it was an environment in which people just felt free to kind of like play like a kid, right? Like play a little bit around.
Let's turn now to attach some numbers to all this and talk a bit about what Gen AI might really be worth to the businesses that harness it successfully. So let's start with what the research tells us about the value Gen AI might add overall to the global economy.
Yeah, when we look across all of the different use cases, in say corporations and other organizations, we're talking, $2 to $4 trillion annually of potential value that can be unlocked by using these technologies. Every knowledge worker has the potential to use these technologies to increase their productivity, right? If I can have something, write the first draft of a document for me or an email, that accelerates my personal productivity. And if you look at all those micro cases, the actual potential might be double of what I just described, at the corporate level. So it really has enormous potential to increase the productivity of the global economy. And, from a macroeconomic standpoint, we're all aging. And in fact, we won't have as many people. And so if we're going to have the next generation do better than our generation, we really need to increase productivity. And so that's one of the potential that we have in front of us.
Are we talking there about Gen AI specifically on top of the productivity value that we expect like regular artificial intelligence to bring, or both together?
That's a terrific point. So the 2 to 4 trillion I mentioned is Gen AI only.
Wow.
But when we look at the overall economy, there are lots of other types of technologies, including physical robotics, but other types of AI, which also can generate value. And we shouldn't forget about those, particularly in the corporate context.
Just one other thing that I think is important with generative AI from other technologies historically is also that the usability of generative AI is so simple, right? One of the reasons things took off is because the user interface was just so darn easy, right? Whether you're 8 years old or 80 years old, anyone could use the ChatGPT, right? And get out responses. The willingness to adopt, I think, is much, much greater than before, right? So some of the challenges historically is like with AI, people described it as, it's a little bit of a black box. I'm not exactly sure what those people in the data science environment really created there.
To be clear, 8-year-olds often could be faster adopters of many technologies.
Fair enough.
I have one at home. I can attest to that. Faster than I, anyway.
It's actually supported in recent survey research that we've done, right? So we've been surveying thousands of business users around the world on the use of AI. And what's interesting, this year we actually asked about their personal use of these technologies, but roughly the same percentage of people in the C-suite as in middle management, as in entry-level positions, had already started using these technologies on a regular basis, both at work as well as in their personal lives. And so that's something that is a little bit different. Oftentimes, some technologies are mostly used, in middle management or in the front line, and executives, they have other people do that stuff for them. But here, they really have personal experience, and that's quite powerful.
I had a CEO client who I was blown away. Fortune 100 CEO client who said, I've been taking an AI class for the last 6 weeks on a Saturday for the last 6 weeks. It's an 8-week class. So he himself has been spending time learning how to code, what it means, what it takes. I was super impressed, blown away as just an example of how executives are thinking about their own learning journey along this dimension of generative AI, which I just wouldn't have heard a year ago from clients.
So in the research, you suggest that in retail and consumer goods, Gen AI could increase profits by as much as $400 billion to $660 billion. Say a little more about how these industries will benefit.
It does come back to what are the use cases that derive the most value for companies. And so again, if we think about those use cases that where Gen AI is most applicable. If you think about sales and marketing, for instance, and if you're a retailer or you're a consumer products company, you want to get to consumers. And so there are a number of ways to do that. One is if you do brand marketing, and Alex's story about the CMOs is very instructive here. Again, if the marketing department can create more alternatives, more first drafts of brand marketing scripts, video, images, music, all those things, that accelerates their productivity. Can they get better messages, more powerful messages out faster? But also, you want to go straight to consumers on a one-to-one segment of one type of marketing basis. The ability for these technologies to create more compelling, individualized marketing, that creates value. Similarly, on customer operations, again, you often have customers calling in. And of course, you have some people who are, helping in your contact centers. But again, either you can automate some of that in order to make sure there's always someone, or someone's able to have a conversation at 3 a.m. when the turkey's not defrosted yet or what have you. Or you can actually use these systems to augment human contact center representatives and give suggestions. Also be a virtual expert for them. That's one of the sort of meta use cases that we know these systems are very good at. If you can take a corpus of your corporate data and hook it up to a large language model, you can query it.
One other area in the retail space that I've been having lots of discussions around is just on store operations as well. So often in the store operations or in a fast food chain operations, the manager that's running that operations and providing them the generative AI tools to provide best practice insights, key things around that specific store operations, whether that be inventory, sales, footprint, but having that at their fingertips so they can make better business decisions every single day is an enormous unlock for retail operations. Because as you can imagine, if you're a large retailer with 1,000 stores across the country, the variability of that store or operations manager is quite large.
It was a really interesting piece that Joanna Stern from the Journal did, just similarly about drive-through lanes in quick service restaurants, where using this generative AI technologies allows a customer to be able to have a conversation. And what's interesting, you worry about jobs too, but the other part of the story was that these restaurant operators don't actually have enough crew to serve the drive-through lane, and so it didn't actually reduce any labor. It just allowed them to actually provide the service, which they otherwise wouldn't have been able to do. And so we see all of those dynamics happening.
So, Michael, could you just explain that a little bit more? I pull up to the drive-through, and instead of speaking with a frontline employee, I'm speaking with
a chatbot,
a Gen AI bot.
Exactly. Yeah, and so you can ask about, how many calories are in this? I'd like to modify my order in the following way. And it was, that she was actually testing it. She had recordings of screaming children and dogs barking. She laid on the horn during part of it. And by the way, if it has a problem, then it actually turns you over to a human too. So, there's different layers for how you can make these things resilient.
Let's now talk about the question that looms large for many of us when we talk about Gen AI. What does Gen AI mean for the future of work and for workers? Which jobs do we expect to be affected the most?
In our research, we use a taxonomy that, roughly is 20 to 30 activities, detailed work activities per occupation. And so typically what these technologies do is automate parts of people's jobs. And so that's and you could describe that as creating superpowers, because if, the machine does X and I have, I save an hour, how can I use that hour more productively? So that is all there. So I think that's number one thing to think about. Number two is, in many cases, and this came out in other research that we did on the future of work in America, for instance, despite some parts of people's jobs, being automated, the demand continues to increase. And so let's take the example of software. I can increase the productivity of software engineers, and we're doing that actually within our own firm. But we still need more software. And so, we're going to accelerate the productivity of the people we have. We're not going to have fewer people. We're actually going to have, we're going to keep adding people and having them be more productive, create higher quality software, more software. But there will be shifts. Indeed, there will be shifts over time. And so again, it's, any individual management team is going to have to make a decision about what you're going to do with, the time that gets freed up. Between now and 2030 in the US, for instance, about a third of the activities that we're paying people to do today potentially could be automated, not just using generative AI, but all kinds of technologies. By the way, that's not that dissimilar. It's a fast pace, but not that dissimilar to what we've seen historically.
What should knowledge workers be doing now, if anything, to prepare for this new era of Gen AI? What kinds of new skills or muscles might we have to develop to make this shift?
I would say if you're a knowledge worker, start playing with the tools and understand what it can do. Because what it allows you to do is it allows you to actually take away some of the mundane tasks you don't want to do anyway, and open up time to spend more time problem solving, cracking hard problems, spending time with your people, coaching your folks, and really thinking. And so I think there's a shift in terms of how people spend their time over time on the knowledge worker side. And so, I think that's one of the things I always encourage people to do is just like we did with the chief marketing officers, is play with it so you can understand how you can leverage it to actually be more impactful, more effective in what you do.
And you mentioned the marketing executives example. What about business leaders generally? What should business leaders be doing to make this pivot?
Well, listen, as I was kind of mentioning, I think it is continuing to play with the tools, understand their uses. And then the reality is it will require people to retrain, learn new skills, redeploy themselves in ways in which they can find and create value in different circumstances.
And, our colleagues wrote this book about Rewired recently. All of those aspects of how you transform a company using technology, Gen AI is another tool that allows you to do that.
A lot of the organizations I'm spending time with is how do I redistribute that to do the things that, they just haven't been able to because there's been a backlog on innovation, on R&D, on new markets that they had not had just capacity to tackle. It just opens up the sphere to tackle things that, you just didn't have time to do before.
Will Gen AI then simply become table stakes, or will some leaders use them differently from others in order to sustain that edge that they're gaining?
Well, sadly, in some ways, it is a run faster business. If you get there sooner, you'll learn, you move up the learning curve, but everyone else is going to be running too. And so, it's not like generative AI is going to give you a competitive advantage forevermore. But again, what we have found is, these technologies tend to increase the spread between the leaders and the laggards. And so if you learn faster, you can, achieve, longer lasting competitive advantage, but that's not because you do something once and then you rest on your laurels. But you have to keep learning, keep pushing, adding to the capabilities that you have, increasing the number as well as the breadth, the effectiveness of the things that you're already doing, using generative AI.
And just to build on that, I think there are certain areas which, to your point, absolutely become table stakes over time. So let me just give you the silly example, but simple example. Yeah, I'm in human resources, and I'd like to have generative AI write me job descriptions. And so, will that become competitively taken away across every company out there? Of course it will. That will just become core to any core HR technology platform that people end up buying over time. However, there'll be other solutions and opportunities on generative AI in which I'm leveraging my internal proprietary data and insights onto the model. That will give me strategic advantage over time. And so the better I am at leveraging my own data and insights into the models to give me more opportunities, that I think can be competitive advantage. I do think, I say it often, speed is a strategy in of itself. So those who run faster will win over time because speed is a strategy. But with all that said, at the same time, those who then are able to learn faster will also win at the same time, right? Because they will be able to deploy these solutions and get greater adoption, which is a key thing, getting people to adopt in the change management component, which has less to do with technology and more to do with people, will be another major factor in the equation on how do you create strategic distance to win over time.
Anything in the research on geographic variation? How much traction do we expect Gen AI to get globally?
What we're seeing is that it's being adopted all around the world. And so it really, partly because of the ease of deployment, we're seeing, and the fact that, these technologies often speak many different languages, computer languages included.
One thing I find fascinating on this topic of geography and globally is different use cases are being adopted or should be adopted. So let me give you the example. A generative AI tool that would give recommendations to a patient on what they could go do if they had the following symptoms. Like usually in the US or in a Western market, you'd need some human in the loop between that machine and the patient. A doctor would have to look at it because you'd want to make sure that from a liability perspective, you had confidence in the recommendation you're giving a patient, of course. However, at the same time, if you look at, a village in India or a village in Africa in which the person doesn't have access to the medical to the hospital or to a doctor, then all of a sudden that solution, you might think twice about the risk and the speed at deploying in the US. You might have a very different perspective of the speed at deploying in a village in India, because the alternative for that person isn't the same. And so the solution is going from 0 to 100 with less liability, but that's a much better alternative for the patient than you might see in America. And so I think this geographic question, again, back to this kind of humanity point, is all intertwined. And I just find it to be a fascinating way to think about how generative AI can add value and how it might differ depending on where you are around the world.
How quickly do we expect these changes to begin to take hold and really start to have impact?
It kind of depends. If you want the easy, simple use cases, those things are going to go fast, super fast. Those areas in which you're going to leverage generative AI to like reimagine or transform a customer journey or a domain of your business, those will take more time to get implemented, but I think are critically important to tackle at the same time, because it's going to force you to tackle some of the really hard and realistic issues and questions you're going to have to deal with, whether that be like risk on data privacy, IP protection. Those are real questions, implications of what am I going to do if it has people implications? Am I going to capture the value or am I not? And what I find is, you can outline your guidelines and protocols on those, and you should, but that's a little bit in theory. And until you actually start to apply them in a real world use case or domain or journey in which you're forced to make these decisions around risk management, legal issues, people issues, technology issues, that's really where the rubber will hit the road for those organizations that make those hard decisions and then are able to learn and move forward.
I just want to emphasize a point that Alex was making, which is, as we've been talking with clients, we found it's really important to work on real problems, right? Not just the little toy problems, but to grapple with the hard problems that can really drive value. Because, as Alex was saying, you learn things, and to the extent to which you have limited resources, limited talent, use it on problems that really matter.
So how much time do you think that folks have?
I would just encourage companies, get moving, get learning, get having impact, and build excitement. And that in itself will create a flywheel of speed and impact that you're going to be excited about.
Alex and Michael, thanks so much for joining us. This was a great discussion.
Thanks for having us on.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for listening to the McKinsey podcast. I'm Lucia Rahilly.
And I'm Roberta Fasaro.
Find us on McKinsey.com. We'll have a transcript of this episode up shortly.
And check out the McKinsey Insights app, where you can find this podcast and other helpful content updated daily.
And if you would, we'd love for you to leave a rating and a review.
We'll see you in 2 weeks.